Good afternoon and welcome to the By Me webinar, Scaffolding Learning, 6 strategies to use with learners in online settings. Our speaker today is Paul O'Prey, By Me educational consultant and teacher trainer. Paul has taught English to students from more than 50 countries and has implemented CLIL methodology, resulting in his participation as a guest teacher trainer at the University of Castilla-La Mancha here in Spain and University El Alto in Bolivia. This session will be divided into 2 parts. The first 45 minutes, we will focus on the main part of the session that Paul has prepared for us. After that, we will dedicate 15 minutes to answering questions. So thanks again for coming, and without any further ado, here is Paul.
Thank you very much, Bernardo. So, I'd like to welcome everybody who has joined the webinar this evening. My name is Paul O'Prey, and I'm going to present our training this evening on scaffolding in the CLIL classroom. If anyone has any questions at any point throughout the presentation, please feel free to write it in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer it as we move through the presentation or at the end of the presentation itself. So, just a little overview of what we're going to cover today. So a little bit about me and my experience of using scaffolding in the CLIL classroom. We're going to address what scaffolding actually is and how the theory underpins it, the function of it, the essential features of scaffolding, as well as 6 strategies of effective scaffolding. So different methods that are really useful for educational practitioners in the learning environment. And then finally, for anyone who has any questions, I'm more than happy to do my best to answer them for you. So, to begin, a little bit about me. I have almost a decade of teaching experience, teaching English as a second language. Now, from an educational point of view, I studied social communication and counseling. And from then, I worked in business and finance. I volunteered as an English language teacher in the West Bank of Palestine back in 2010. And that's where my love for English language teaching began. And that's where my kind of essential career in teaching started. So I moved in to educate myself and get qualified as a teacher. I moved into teaching English as a second language full time. So qualification-wise, apart from my degree, I have a master's in education. I've got a diploma in education and training from the UK. I'm on the professional teachers register with QTLS in England. I'm Cambridge certified with a CELTA, and I've got multiple TEFL certificates for different specialized courses within the field of English language tuition. I've spent most of my time working here in Spain in different language academies and also bilingual schools. And I've also worked in international schools in London, which has given me the opportunity not only to teach students from Spain, but also to teach students from more than 50 different nationalities around the globe. So it's given me a lot of exposure into the differentiated learning between cultures and the different challenges which can come up in the learning environment and what we need to do to kind of scaffold so that each student is having the learning needs met. So what is scaffolding? And I think, you know, the picture speaks 1,000 words here. You've got the structure of a house. You've got scaffolding at different levels, which supports the constructors building the house. Okay, so they use the scaffolding to develop each stage of the house before moving on to the next part. But what does this mean in relation to education? How can we apply this theory, this metaphor of scaffolding to education? Well, essentially, the teacher, the educator, they become the constructor, but not the constructor of buildings, the constructor of learning in the educational environment. It is their role to use scaffolding to support every student by breaking the learning up into bite-size or manageable chunks so that they can equip the student with the knowledge and the skills that they need so that they can move on to the next level. And step by step, they can achieve independence in their learning. Now, scaffolding is underpinned by theory. And as educationalists, most of our practice is underpinned by theory. So scaffolding theory was first introduced in the late 1950s by an educator or a cognitive psychologist called Jerome Bruner. And he used this term to describe children's oral language acquisition. And to exemplify this, we can see the image here on this slide. He used joint picture book reading to demonstrate what he meant. Now, children acquiring their language and being supported by their parents, the experts, through the use of picture books. The children are practicing both the receptive skills as well as their productive skills. They're seeing the visual image and associating it with the words and the sentences. They're using the language that they have to communicate and to read. And of course, the parents are supporting them with helping them pronounce new words as well as find new vocabulary which they might not have known previously. Okay, so inspired by Lev Vygotsky's concept of an expert helping a novice, scaffolding is all about changing the level of support to suit the cognitive potential of the learner. So if we take, for example, the expert in any field who is first beginning to help a new learner, they can't talk to them or educate them at their level. So they have to break the learning down into small chunks and step by step tutor them so that they can reach a higher level over a period of time. Now, an important thing to remember as educationalists such as ourselves is that the amount of guidance can be adjusted. Okay, it can be adjusted. So in the sense, if a learner struggles with a task, the expert or the tutor or the educationalist, they provide more support as needed. However, as the student progresses with the task, less support is provided because the student is becoming more competent and more confident in their abilities, and they're developing the skills independently without as much tutor-led help. Vygotsky refers to scaffolding as something which maintains, or it works to maintain, the learner's potential level of development within what he refers to as the zone of proximal development. Now, what does this mean, the zone of proximal development? Well, simply put, this is the distance between what the student or what the learner can do by themselves without help and what they can do with support from someone who has more knowledge or more expertise in a particular topic or subject. Now, it's important. The zone of proximal development is crucial when we're applying scaffolding to learning. And it's crucial because if you provide not enough support, then the students get frustrated and they disengage. If you provide too much support, then the students rely or can become reliant on the help of the teacher and therefore don't really try to complete the tasks themselves or try not to engage by themselves without first asking the tutor. So it's important that we as teachers, as we as educationalists, try to find the balance between what they know and what they can do and what they can do with support, and try to meet them in the middle so that it's challenging enough for them to engage with the learning, but not so challenging that it frustrates them and gets them to disengage. Now, we know as teachers that learning proceeds from the known to the new, and good teaching builds on this through scaffolding. And within this, it's important that we know our students. We know what they're capable of. We also know their interests. We know what frustrates them in the classroom. We know what interests them in the classroom. Okay, because when we have that knowledge, then we can organize the learning and organize the scaffolding for learning and personalize it to the learning needs of the individual. Now, students learn in many ways, and this has been expressed by Howard Gardner in the theory of multiple intelligence. So if we understand that and we apply that, then this scaffolding then can aid us to help students build new knowledge based on their own prior experiences and their prior knowledge or assumed knowledge. We're going to move on now to the function of scaffolding. So, the purpose. So, it's there to support learners when learners cannot achieve something on their own. Now, it's easy in many cases to provide work or give tasks to a class full of students and assume that equally they're all capable of completing the task. Now, that might be true for a large percentage, but there will be a percentage of the learners in the classroom who will not be able to do that. And thus, knowing your student will allow the teacher to anticipate the difficulties a student may have and thus design scaffolded strategies in order to assist the students who are struggling to achieve what they cannot achieve on their own. And just like the analogy of the constructors developing a house, to develop a house, they use scaffolding as a support to build each stage of the house before moving on to the next level. We can't ask a constructor to build a roof if we don't have the foundation and the first story or the second story already constructed. So the same principle applies. Now, the result of helping students in this kind of manner will allow them to continuously grow and develop by completing challenging tasks and learning new concepts. So at each stage, when we break the learning down and we stage it, the student is essentially achieving progressively. And this progressive achievement allows our students to develop their confidence and their competence. So they rely less, maybe on always asking the teacher, and they trust themselves a little bit more. The key to scaffolding is to provide enough support to help build confidence. And confidence is key to the student's success. If the student is afraid of making mistakes, or they're afraid of not completing the task correctly or accurately, and they start to lose confidence in their own abilities, this will make their learning journey much more difficult. So it's important as educationalists, as tutors, as teachers, that we do what we can to recognize what the students are doing well, and then show them what they need to do differently if they need to make corrections. And I'll talk about this with an example very shortly in the presentation. It's important that we push the limits of the student or encourage them to work beyond their limits, to help them develop new skills and to complete tasks. But of course, not too much, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. You don't want the student to become too reliant on the teacher's help. So there has to be that balancing act between what they know, what they can do, what they can't do without support, and provide enough support to allow them to achieve it, develop their confidence, develop their competence, so that they push forward with their learning. It's important that we maintain the level of challenge to help expand the student's skill set. Okay, so it's not too easy, it's not too difficult, but it's challenging enough to allow them to move forward and progress. So, as I mentioned as well, it's adjustable. The teacher can adjust the level of scaffolding, and as the learner's ability increases, the amount of help decreases accordingly. Why? What's the end result of this? Well, the end result of this is increased student autonomy, independence. It fosters the learner's growth towards independence and independent learning, taking decisions, making decisions, giving it a try, giving it a go, okay? Not always being reliant. So as the tutor or as a teacher, this is a balancing act to be able to know the student and be able to decrease when it's appropriate to decrease and increase the level of help when it's relevant also. Okay. The 3 essential features of scaffolding. So the first of the essential features is the interaction. And the interaction between the learner and the expert should be collaborative to be effective. So when I say collaborative, it means to acknowledge the student's interests and engage them in tasks and modify tasks which they like. Okay, so that it's not a case of the teacher gives them a task, tells them to do it, and come back whenever it's completed. There has to be this collaboration of finding out what they can do, what they can't do, what they like, what they dislike, and try to construct the learning, construct the activities in accordance with that in order to get the best outcome and the best results. Back to what I refer to from Lev Vygotsky, that learning should take place in the learner's zone of proximal development. So educators need to be aware of the learner's current level. Okay, back to knowing your student. To know their current level of knowledge and then work to a certain extent beyond this. Now, in many educational institutions, it's very easy to kind of pitch learning at a kind of a general level, and many students can accomplish the success in tasks, and there may be a percentage who can't and who struggle. But with that percentage who can't, or with that percentage who struggle, then it's important as tutors, as teachers, that we recognize that and that we put things in place in order to assist them. Now, this can be done through either soft scaffolding or hard scaffolding. Soft scaffolding is what we observe when the students are on task. And if we observe difficulties, we identify what we need to do on task in order to be able to help the students. However, hard scaffolding is when we anticipate, for example, the tasks or the activities in tomorrow's lesson, who may struggle with them, who may need extra help with them, and what help am I going to give them? The third is the scaffold is a support and guidance by the teacher, which is gradually removed as the learner becomes more proficient. So 2 key words here: it's adjustable and it's temporal. It's temporary and it's adjustable. It's not set in stone. Okay, and this is the balancing act of the tutor. This is the balancing act of the expert, to know when to scaffold, to know when to increase the amount of help, and to know when to reduce it whenever they see the progression of the student. It's there to serve a purpose. That purpose is to support and to facilitate the growth of knowledge, which is needed so that they can independently complete their tasks. Okay, we're going to move on to the 6 strategies of effective scaffolding. The first of the 6 strategies is show and tell. Now, I'm sure most of you will agree that we all learn best, or most of us anyway, learn best by seeing something rather than hearing about it. How many of us have said, just show me, okay? Don't worry about telling me, just show me how it's done and I'll do it, okay? This concept is modeling. So you're modeling a concept for your students. And this is a cornerstone of scaffolding. You're giving some visual reference, something that they can connect with visually, and they can use as a guide, they can use as a model when they're completing tasks. So this may also be the demonstration of a desired behavior. This may be new knowledge. This may be a project. Okay. So if we show the students the outcome before they do it, and we can take this as an example, okay? We take this from the By Me Natural Science Pupils book. And here we've got a poster of the digestive system labeled with key vocabulary from the lesson. Now, let's assume we want our students to complete a diagram or a project like this to reinforce their learning from a Friday's lesson, and we want them to do this over the weekend, for example. If we just tell them, they don't have any visual reference of what's expected from them. But if we provide them with a visual cue, okay, something like this is what previous students have completed, okay? We've included the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, etc. Then they have some type of visual connection of what's expected from them. Now, the same applies to things like science projects and essays, okay? A model should be presented alongside any criteria chart or rubric. And during my career to date, I've seen this, especially with essays at higher learning levels. Students expected to write essays, but they don't have a model or something to follow. They don't know what's expected, what's the marking criteria, what's in the rubric, what's an introduction or a main body or a conclusion, what does that consist of? Okay, they don't have any type of reference. And of course, with younger learners, the more visual it is, the better it is for them to comprehend. Modeling by the teacher or even other students, this can provide a reference guide for others to follow. So if we look at this example, we have the teacher, first of all, doing the experiment. The students are assisting, the students are observing. Now, this is the reference point for the students. So they can see the expert, what they're doing, and then they use this as a reference guide to follow so they themselves can also complete it. Let's take this as an example. So this is an example of a young learner coloring outside the lines. This can also be applied to incorrect spelling. Okay, so we look at this. The student was tasked with coloring in the different animals, the different dogs. But of course, they've colored outside the lines. They haven't colored in what we deem to be the perfect. Okay. However, we can approach this in different ways. We can tell the student, listen, this is incorrect. You haven't done this correctly. You've colored outside the lines. All that's going to do is destroy the student's confidence. In their world, especially for young learners, they've done a fantastic job. Okay, this is brilliant. Look what I've done. Look what I've created. So, as a skilled practitioner in the educational field, it is important, and I'm sure you will agree, that we recognize what they are doing well. We compliment what they have achieved. We support their confidence. And we gently show them the correct form with examples. So if the objective of the task is to color inside the lines, then we can show them on a different piece of paper. Okay, what I want you to do is I want you to take this color, follow the line, and color inside the shape. Okay, then after we gently show them, we ask them to repeat. That way, their confidence doesn't suffer. They feel good about what they've done, but they've now been shown a different method, the method which you want them to achieve. And by showing them gently and supportively and getting them to repeat, they will repeat, and the likelihood of the objectives being met will be much higher. guided practice. So we have this concept of I do, we do, you do. Okay, with the ultimate goal of supporting student independence. Now, this I do, we do, you do relates to the PPP model, which all of us know from teaching, which is presentation, practice, and production. Okay, so you have the teacher presenting the example, you've got controlled practice aided by the teacher, and then you've got the freer practice. You have the production where the student will complete the task independently by themselves. Now, this model can be applied to many different tasks and many different subjects. If it's home economics, if it's a cooking lesson, science experiments, if it's building a model, if it's writing an essay, okay, if it's projects. If we show them, first of all, we introduce some form of controlled practice so that we can identify what the students are achieving and where the gaps in learning are. Then once we know that, we can kind of modify that or scaffold that, then we move on to the freer practice. And of course, providing support as necessary. Okay. Number 2 is tapping into prior knowledge. Now, if the student has some type of connection with the learning and some type of knowledge or experience that they had in the past, this will be a great help. So ask students to share their own experiences and ideas about the content and have them relate and connect it to their own lives. Okay, so in the case of planting a tree or planting a plant, here we've got a perfect example from the By Me Students course book. So we look at a picture and we identify things which live in water or have legs or, for example, can fly. And we can ask the students questions. You know, have you ever planted a tree with your parents? Have you ever planted a tree with your grandparents? You know, what did you eat the last time you went to a restaurant? Or what do you eat for breakfast? Okay, so they're making some type of connection, visual connection with an experience that they have had or some type of knowledge they have, and then they can relate more deeply with the content of the book or the content of the lesson. If we look at these 2 images, for example, you know, do you have a pet fish? Do you feed it? Part of the natural science book will be the parts of the fish, the tail, the fins, the scales, the head, the body. Okay, maybe you want to have a pet fish in the classroom where the students can feed it and they're repeating what they practice at home for those who have a pet fish. Or recycling, you know, encouraging recycling not only in the classroom, but I'm sure most of our students practice recycling at home. They can identify where the plastics go, where the glass goes, where the papers go, and the different colors. So they've got some type of reference in their life and they can connect it to their classroom learning. Number 3 is pre-teaching vocabulary. Now, this is super important. And again, we have an example here from the Natural Science course book. I have witnessed on many occasions students being given tasks to complete, and maybe much of the vocabulary the students don't know. Now, that's fine if you're applying the test, teach, test model. You want to see what they can achieve before actually introducing. That's okay. However, if you're not applying that test, teach, test model, then we can support their task achievement by pre-teaching the vocabulary. So if we look at this, for example, we introduce using photos or flashcards or realia. We can see that the food groups, they're broken into groups, and we can say, okay, identify what they know and identify what they don't know. They have some type of visual reference which they can associate with a new vocabulary. If we're breaking that down into different meals, breakfast, lunch, snack, and dinner, then we're learning new words, 4 new words or potential new words, and we're connecting the vocabulary of the food that they know and maybe the new food that they haven't yet learned, and we're categorizing it, and now they've got some form of association. It's also useful in scaffolding to create mind maps to support and diagrams for reference. And here's another example. So we're looking at the human body, okay? We're looking at the organs, okay? So if we take this, for example, and we're reinforcing the learning by getting the student either to label this in their book, to draw the image and write the words in the book, okay? Something that they have some type of written reference and visual reference for their revision, for their future study, and also to help them to connect with their learning kinesthetically and visually. Now, an activity that I have found useful in classrooms is to introduce a quiz activity to help practice the vocabulary, okay, to even practice or learn the new vocabulary as a lead-in to the task. Now, how do we do this? So the quiz can be either a verbal quiz or a quiz associated with an interactive game on the interactive whiteboard. And the students, based on the topic, have to search for and identify the words to answer the questions. Now, what this does is this harvests the skill in the student for searching for target vocabulary in their student's book in order to be able to answer the questions. So they're looking, they're searching, they're identifying, they're using the visual cues, they're listening, and therefore they're connecting and they are relating. Graphic organizers, pictures and charts, they all serve as scaffolding tools. They help to visually represent ideas and organize information. If we take this one on our slide as an example, insects, and it's broken into the different categories. So the three body sections, the head, the thorax, the abdomen. Okay, we've got one or two pairs of wings, you've got one pair of antennae, you've got 6 legs. So this is clear. You've got the image in the middle and you've got it broken into categories. So when the student is learning the new vocabulary, again, it's connected to something visual and is logically and clearly represented. Logically and clearly represented, which aids their own study. So in their preparation for exams, as well as an easier and more effective way to retain the information so that they themselves can reproduce it in the next lessons, revision lessons, etc. Concept maps. Now, concept maps include spider diagrams, system maps, mind maps, etc. We can also use different graphical tools for organizing and representing and displaying relationships between knowledge and concepts. So here, for example, on the picture, we've got the roots. And now we can link roots with, for example, the different types of vegetables which are considered roots, like a carrot, for example. They can make this connection. Now, here we've got the visual of the flower as well as the key vocabulary. It's labeled. Now, if the student needs to revise the keywords, and especially when they're younger learners and the main focus is on vocabulary, and as they progress, they're building their sentences. But these are the bricks, okay? And if they have something visual which are linked to the key vocabulary, it makes that learning journey much easier for them. This is also relevant for SE structures, as well as parts of the body, maybe seasons and plants, etc. So this concept can be applied to different aspects of the lesson and lessons. Okay, number 5 is strategy instruction. Now, strategy instruction, it helps to teach students when they're preparing, for example, for exams. Exam speaking techniques. In many cases, when students are practicing their speaking, they don't have any structure, or maybe they don't know how to develop their answer, or they answer the question, but not in great detail or great depth. Okay? So as practitioners, as ESL practitioners, as CLIL practitioners, not only for exams, but even when we're fostering the skill of speaking within learning activities in the classroom, if we provide a strategy, let's say, for example, speaking, where they express their opinion, they provide a reason, and they follow that up with an example. There's a clear strategy to help them develop their ideas and develop their answer. It's the same when it comes to essay writing methods. Now, in many environments, skilled practitioners will show a model of how to write an essay and the different types of essay. Is it a advantage, disadvantage, argumentative, opinion, etc.? This is more relevant for the kind of the older age groups within the school system, okay, who have went through the kind of CLIL progression. So we can use strategy to show them how to write their introduction, paraphrasing a question, their thesis statement, how to develop their topic sentences, develop their reasons and their examples, and also summarize that within the conclusion. And once the students understand the style and the format, then they'll be able to apply the techniques independently without conscious focus. They can apply it unconsciously because they'll be unconsciously competent of their skills because they have learned the strategy. Okay, number 6 is give time to talk. Learners need time to process new ideas and information, especially in CLIL and ESL, when sometimes at different levels they may be translating and they may try to collect their ideas and connect concepts together. Be patient, give them time, okay? And also encourage other students to respect the turn of others when they're speaking. Okay, this is crucial. If a student is feeling a little bit nervous because they've been asked a question and the others are trying to talking through and the teacher maybe is impatient, this puts extra stress, unnecessary stress on the student. And what it can do is it encourages them to regress as opposed to try their best, okay? So ensure that you're fostering an environment, a supportive environment where there's collaboration, because collaboration and support are essential for progressive learning. We can also assist our learners to communicate their ideas through the use of prompts. And prompts are physical or verbal cues to help aid the student's recall of prior or assumed knowledge. Now, different prompts include physical, verbal, and positional. Now, physical prompts may be body cues, body movements like pointing or nodding. Let's say a student is trying to say a word, but you can see that they're doubting the word that they have chosen. You can nod to encourage them that, yes, that's the correct word. Or maybe there is something on the whiteboard or a word on a wall display that you can point to assist them to look at so that they can complete that sentence or that response. Verbal cues can also include the teacher emphasizing the syllable stress. Okay, the syllable stress are sound, which will trigger their memory to actually associate it with the word that they want to say or want to choose, and thus apply it to their answer. Okay, and something which I think and feel is crucial is positional prompts. These are wall displays. If we take from the educational theory the age of the student and divide it by 2 and assume that's how much attention that you're going to be getting before the student gets distracted and starts to move their attention away, then do you want the student, and we understand that that happens, do we want the students to look at a blank wall? Or do we want them to have something to learn from passively? Now, that passive learning can be a project or a wall display related to previous activities or current activities, so that they're reading, let's say it's the planets, they're reading the planets, they're looking at the planets, maybe it's the parts of the body, the skeletal system, parts of a plant, etc. Therefore, they're not thinking about idle things. Their attention is encapsulated by something visual on the wall, and there's passive learning taking place. Okay, and these can also help students whenever they're attempting to answer questions on task activities also. Okay, at this point I want to move on to technology, and I think this is very important, especially in the modern era. How can we use technology to scaffold learning for our students? And one is text to speech. Text to speech. Now, the text to speech can help students who struggle with reading because they can listen to the words as they are reading the text. They can also use pronunciation activities, play and repeat, so that they can hear the sounds and they can repeat the sounds. For speaking practice, let's say you're using a document on your computer, the student's using the document, they have the dictation option where they can speak and it types, okay? This will give them the ability to practice a pronunciation, see whether the system has understood it correctly and written it on the paper. And if their structures are incorrect, then the built-in grammar programs will identify it so that they can visually see, again, what works, what doesn't work, what they need to change, etc., etc. So additional tools, and as teachers and as tutors and as practitioners, it's up to us how we kind of integrate this method into the scaffolding of our learning. Vocabulary games. Vocabulary games are fantastic, and we can take this example again from the interactive learning toolkit of the By Me coursebook. We've got sentences, we've got missing words, we've got a selection of words, and the student has to complete the sentence. Now, these can be done both as a controlled practice activity, as a class with a teacher. It can also be done independently, depending on how the system for the students, the learning system is set up, if they have tablets, if they have access to the online learning environment, etc. But again, as practitioners, we can modify and integrate and use these as really effective scaffolding measures. Also, explainer videos and animation videos refers back to the visual aids and show and tell. If we have to explain a concept, that concept will be more easily understood if there's an explainer or animation video available. Okay, 5-minute animation video to explain a concept. Students will be engaged. It's colorful, it's fast-paced, it's moving, it's relevant, it's different, and it also links in with differentiated learning. So, successful scaffolding techniques must be combined with effective instruction. This is important to support the success of every student. So if we're going to use a particular method of scaffolding, it's important to inform and instruct the student clearly and accurately so that they know what is expected of them in order to be able to complete the task. This brings us almost to the end of our online presentation and training. So I would like to finish by just going over a quick summary of what we have covered. So know your students and what they are capable of doing. This gives you the power to plan. This gives you the power to anticipate what scaffolding techniques, methods, and measures that you may or might or want to include in your classroom, in the learning environment. Use scaffolding as a support to build each stage of knowledge before moving on to the next level. Remember the metaphor of the house. The house is built in stages, and scaffolding is used by the constructors to support the development of each stage of the building. The educational practitioner applies the same theory to construct learning and to help the student build their confidence and competence to achieve the outcome, the learning outcome and skills and tasks. Change the level of support to suit the cognitive potential of the learner. Now, scaffolding isn't something that we consider fixed. It's something which is temporal. It is something which is adjustable. We can change it as needed. If the students are struggling, we apply more scaffolding techniques. If the students are progressing on the task or on the activity, we reduce the amount of help that we need to offer them. What is the ultimate objective is to encourage them to be independent learners so they can complete the tasks by themselves, fostering this skill and encouraging their confidence. Learning should take place in the zone of proximal development. So it's not too easy. It's not too difficult. It's in between. It's challenging enough to keep the student engaged and help them to progress. If it's too easy, then they'll lose interest. If it's too difficult, they'll disengage from it, or they may become more reliant on the teacher's help. So it's important that you anticipate and balance what's required to operate within the zone of proximal development. Support and guidance should be gradually removed as the learner becomes more proficient. Okay, this is down to the skill of the practitioner to identify the student, how they're progressing, how quickly they're progressing, and how much support they require. This also relates to soft scaffolding skills and hard scaffolding skills, scaffolding on task and activities, and anticipating potential problems and putting in place measures to support students who may require it. Plan and select the methods of scaffolding according to the needs of the students. Again, knowing your students, understanding what they're capable of doing independently without support and help, as well as what they can do with help, will allow you as a teacher and the student as a learner to achieve the objective more easily. Okay, now I will answer any questions for anybody who has a question for me. Let me have a little look. Okay, so what online tools apart from the ones from Google do you recommend? I mean, online tools apart from Google, again, it's knowing your student and knowing what your students like. So if they enjoy online games, can you integrate that into the lesson for the content that you're teaching? If the students enjoy videos or animations, then can we include those in the learning, in the class? Okay. There are multiple online tools and online websites which can support interactive activities which you can integrate into your lesson planning. But again, what you choose depends on the interests of your students for differentiated learning. Okay. Okay, hello. We've got lots of hellos. And okay, fantastic. Okay. Another thing that we can do is, from part of the control practice, to answer one of the questions here, is we can engage the students with the interactive learning kit online. And this, because it's interactive, will in many cases hold the students' attention. It will engage them. You can call the students up to complete the exercises interactively before completing the task independently in their course book. We can also do this through the use of interactive competitive games, fostering healthy competition. So let's say a quiz game, and you've got like a spin the wheel activity. Spin the wheel activity, you ask a question, students are in groups, they respond, they have to search for the information in their book, fostering this search and identification skill. They're practicing their listening skills with the question, they are responding, you encourage them to respond using complete and full answers. And of course, this healthy competition will engage their interest and get them more connected with the content and the material, and of course support the objective of the lesson itself. So I would like to thank everybody for your attention. I hope everybody has learned something useful from me today, or I've inspired ideas or new ideas or something which you can incorporate to scaffold the learning with the students in your classroom. Thank you very much for your attention again, and I will pass you over to Bernardo.
Thank you very much for your questions. From By Me, we would like to thank you all for coming and participating in today's webinar. Don't forget to join us on our next session, which you can find on our website, www.bilingualbyme.com. And before we sign off, many thanks to Paul for his practical and very useful training. Have a very nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bernardo.